Putangina. Sino to? The words clawed their way out of Dante's throat, harag, disbelieving whisper that barely disturbed the late afternoon quiet of their small living room. His thumb, calloused from years of gripping jeepney steering wheel, had frozen mid-scroll on the glowing screen of Clarice's phone. Isang babae. Nakangiti, medyo pa-cute, labas ang dimples, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Hindi si Clarice. At siguradong sigurado siya, hindi niya kilala. He hadn't meant to snoop. Diyos ko, kailan ba siya naging ganoong klaseng asawa? Clarice had left her phone on the worn-out sofa, probably forgotten when she rushed to the banyo after complaining about sudden stomach ache. Dante had just picked it up, intending to place it on the small center table, when the screen lit up with a new message notification. Hindi niya sinasadyang makita, pero kitang-kita ng dalawang mata niya ang preview. A message from someone named Rina and a small, square thumbnail of that same smiling woman. Curiosity, a cold, sharp thing, pricked at him. Against his better judgment, his thumb moved, unlocking the phone, Clarice's birthday, an easy guess, and opening the gallery. And there it was. Not just one photo. Marami. Some were selfies of the woman, others were. Ay, putakte, Dante breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. May isang picture, medyo blurry, na parang kuha sa loob ng isang madilim na bar. The woman was laughing, head thrown back, and an arm was slung casually around her shoulder. He zoomed in. Kamay ni Clarice. He knew her hand, knew the small, faded scar near her wrist from a childhood accident. His stomach churned. Parang may bumaliktad sa sikmura niya. Selos? Pero higit pa doon, gulat. Confusion. Isang malaking di-isihi na umalinggaw sa isip niya. Babae. All these years, if he ever worried, it was the usual, the stereotypical. Baka may katrabahong lalaki, baka may lumang kaklase. Pero babae. The bathroom door creaked open. Clarice emerged, pale but looking slightly better. Hi, salamat. Akala ko hindi natitigil yung G. Her voice trailed off. Her eyes, usually soft and warm when looking at him, widened in alarm, zeroing in on the phone in his hand. Parang nahuli. Dante. Anong ginagawa mo? She stammered, her hand instinctively reaching out. He didn't move, didn't look away from the screen. Sino to, Clarice? His voice was dangerously quiet. Sino tong Rina? At bakit may picture kayo na ganito? He finally lifted his gaze, and the pain, the accusation in his eyes, made her flinch. Bakit mo binubuksan yan? Clarice's voice rose, a mix of panic and indignation. She lunged for the phone, snatching it from his grasp. Privacy ko yan, Dante. You have no right. Privacy. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Pagkatapos ng ganito, Clarice. Anong klaseng privacy yan? He gestured vaguely at the phone she was now clutching to her chest like shield. Sino nga siya? O wala lang yun? Kaibigan. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Her eyes darted around, refusing to meet his. Ang bilis ng pag-iling niya, parang gustong burahin ang tanong sa hangin. Kaibigan. Dante's voice dripped with sarcasm. Ganyan ba magpicture ang magkaibigan ngayon? With arms around each other, looking like more. His own words tasted bitter. He felt a wave of nausea. From the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms, a small shadow shifted. Ian. Their 10-year-old son, half hidden by the doorjamb, eyes wide and frightened. He'd probably heard the raised voices. Nakita niya ang hawak ni Mama na phone, ang paraan ng pag-agaw nito, ang galit sa mukha ni Papa. Dante saw him, Clarice could see the disbelief warring with the dawning horror on her face. 10 babae. 8 Pressy finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Clarice nodded miserably, unable to meet her cousin's gaze. Hindi ko alam, ate. Hindi ko alam bakit. Siguro dahil lumaki akong laging kulang. Laging feeling ko hindi ako sapat. Nakailangan ko na ng atensyon, ng validation kahit sa maling paraan. She looked up then, her eyes pleading. Ate, wala akong excuse pero ito ako. Ito yung totoong ako. Isang-isang halimaw. It pressed his eyes welled up. A single tear traced path down her wrinkled cheek, then another. Pero hindi siya nagsalita. Walang sermon, walang husga. Just profound, quiet sorrow that mirrored Clarice's own. In a way, her silence was worse than any scolding. It was the silence of a heart breaking for her. Clarice's shoulders slumped. The fight, the denial she'd shown Dante earlier, was gone. Only a vast, empty despair remained. Anong gagawin ko, At? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Paano ko to ayusin? Paano ko pa mabubuo yung pamilya ko? Si Dante si Ian. The thought of her son's innocent, trusting face was another stab to her already bleeding heart. Hindi ko alam, ate. Hindi ko alam paano itama to di. Her voice trailed off into a desolate whisper. The rain outside seemed to weep with her, a mournful soundtrack to the ruins of her life. Takot. Sobrang takot ang nararamdaman niya. Takot na baka ito na talaga ang katapusan. The next few days were a blur of strained silences and averted gazes. Dante sat on the banig in the living room, the unspoken chasm between him and Clarice wider than the narrow space that physically separated them. Clarice tried to act normal, for Ian's sake. Nagluluto siya, nag-aasikaso sa bahay, pero parang anino lang siya ng sarili niya. She could feel Dante's eyes on her sometimes, cold and unreadable. The accusation was always there, simmering beneath the surface. Si Ian, he was quieter than usual. Matalinong bata si Ian. He knew something was terribly wrong. Nakikita niya ang lungkot sa mata ni Mama, ang galit na pilit tinatago ni Papa. One afternoon, Clarice told Dante she was stepping out, may pupuntahan lang ako sandali. Bibilhan ko si Ian ng bagong tsinelas. It was a flimsy excuse. Ang totoo, kailangan niya lang makahinga. Kailangan niyang makausap si Rina. Kailangan niyang hindi niya alam. Siguro, kailangan niya ng kumpirmasyon na hindi siya tuluyang nababaliw. Ian, who was in his room supposedly doing homework, heard her. His new, unsettling curiosity had taken root in him since that awful fight. Sino si Rina? Bakit galit si Papa kay Mama dahil doon sa picture? He peeked through his door, watching his mother grab her faded handbag. He made a split-second decision. Kailangan niyang malaman. Quiet as a mouse, Ian slipped out of the house a few minutes after Clarice left. He knew the general direction she usually took when she needed air towards the busier part of their barangay, near the palengke and the jeepney terminal. His heart thumped a nervous kirakirad against his ribs. Parang detective sa pelikula. Pero hindi ito laro. This felt important. He spotted her near the corner bakery, the one that sold his favorite pan de coco. Clarice was looking around, her expression anxious. Then, another woman approached her. A woman with a bright, easy smile and kind eyes. The same woman from the photos on his mother's phone. Serena. Ian ducked behind a parked jeepney, its colorful, gaudy decorations providing ample cover. His small hands fumbled for the old, slightly cracked cell phone his Tita Pressy had given him last Christmas. He wasn't very good with it, but he knew how to use the camera. With trembling fingers, he aimed and clicked. Once. Twice. He saw them talking, their heads close together. Then, Rina reached out and pulled his mother into a hug. It wasn't just a friendly hug. It was a long hug. Mahigpit. Clarice leaned into it, her eyes closed, a look of something like relief, or maybe pain, on her face. Miss ko na tong yakap mo, Ian faintly heard Rina murmur, her voice soft. Yakap. His mother didn't hug him like that. Not anymore. A strange, tight feeling clenched Ian's chest. Sakit. It was a new kind of pain, sharp and confusing. This wasn't just a friend. This was something else. Something that made his papa angry and his mama tihi. Pagtataksil. The word one had heard older kids whisper about their neighbors suddenly had a face. Dalawang mukha. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the phone. He took a few more pictures, his mind a whirl of confusion and dawning, painful understanding. He had to tell his papa. Kahit natatakot siya. Kahit ayaw niyang masaktan palalo si mama. But Papa needed to know. Papa deserved to know. As soon as Clarice and Rina parted ways, Clarice heading back towards their house and Rina towards the market, Ian scurried home, his heart pounding. He found Dante in the living room, staring blankly at the blaring noontime show on their small TV. Tay ni. Ian began, his voice small. Dante looked at him, his expression softening slightly. Oh Ian? Bakit, anak? Ian held out the phone. Tay si mama po kanina. He scrolled through the photos, his small finger hovering over the one of Clarice and Rina embracing. Yan po si mama kanina. Dante took the phone. His eyes scanned the small screen. Ian watched as his father's face changed. The flicker of concern for Yan was replaced by stony mask, his knuckles turned white as he gripped the phone. He zoomed in on the hug, his jaw tightening. He scrolled to the next photo, then the next. Walang emosyon sa mukha niya. Parang bato. For a long moment, Dante just stared at the images. The blare of the ZE seemed to fade into the background. Then, slowly, deliberately, he handed the phone back to Ian. He didn't say a word. Hindi siya sumigaw. Hindi siya nagtanong. He just stood up, walked towards the small aparador where he kept his few clothes, and began to pack a small, worn-out duffel bag damit lang. Walang picture. Walang alaala. Clarice arrived a few minutes later, a small paper bag with new pair of tsinelas for Yan in her hand. She saw Dante isa the door, bag slung over his shoulder. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in her eyes. Dante. Aalis ka. Saan ka pupunta? He didn't look at her. He just opened the door. Dante, sandali. Clarice cried out, panic lacing her voice. Mag-usap tayo. Please. He paused at the doorway, his back still to her. Wala na tayong kailangang pag-usapan, Clarice. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. Devoid of her. Then, he stepped out. Walang sigawan. Walang iyakan. Just the soft click of the door closing behind him, a sound that echoed the finality of a slamming coffin lid. The tsinela slipped from Clarice's numb fingers, landing softly on the dusty floor. Naiwan si Clarice, nakatayo sa gitna ng sala, kasama si Ian na tahimik na umiiyak sa gilid. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the sound of a mother's heart shattering into a million irreparable pieces. It took 3 days. 3 araw ng impyerno. 3 araw na parang multo si Clarice sa sarili nilang bahay, si Ian na lang ang tanging koneksyon niya sa realidad. The silence Dante left behind was a living entity, breathing down her neck, suffocating her. She barely ate, barely slept. Bawat sulok ng bahay, anino ni Dante ang nakikita niya. The weight of her sins, of Sampung Town, pressed down on her, threatening to crush her entirely. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She had to find him. Kailangan niyang magsalita. Kailangan niyang umamin. Not for forgiveness, she knew, deep down, that was too much to ask. But for what? Maybe just to lift a fraction of the unbearable weight. To give him the truth, raw and unfiltered, no matter how ugly. Pressy, bless her soul, knew where Dante might be. Subukan mo sa talyer ni Mang Cardo, yung malapit sa may terminal ng bus. Minsan doon tumatambay yun pag maraming iniisip. And so, with trembling legs and a heart that felt like lead weight in her chest, Clarice went. Nakita niya si Dante, nakaupo sa isang lumang gulong sa gilid ng talyer, hawak ang isang baso ng malamig na sarsi, nakatingin sa malayo. He looked empty. Parang wala ng laman. The usual spark in his eyes, the easy smile he always had for Yan, was gone. Lumapit siya, bawat hakbang parang may tinik. Dante. He turned his head slowly. No surprise in his eyes. Just a weary resignation. Anong ginagawa mo dito, Clarice? His voice was flat, tired. Kailangan nating mag-usap. Her voice was barely a whisper. Pwede ba? He stared at her for a long moment, then gave a curt nod towards a rickety wooden bench few feet away. CJ. She sat, her hands twisting in her lap. The noise of the tallier, the clang of metal, the hiss of an air compressor, the loud banter of the mechanics, faded into dull hum. All she could focus on was Dante, his profile etched against the grimy wall. Dante. Yung tungkol sa mga nakita mo di. She started, then faltered. The words were so hard to say. The shame was a physical thing, coiling in her gut. He didn't look at her. Ayoko nang marinig, Clarice. His voice was low, but firm. Nakita ko na. Naintindihan ko na. Hindi, Dante, please. Tears started to well up, blurring her vision. Kailangan mong marinig. Kailangan kong sabihin. Para sa akin. Para malaman mo lahat. He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of pure exhaustion. Pero sige, tapusin mo. He finally turned to face her, his eyes devoid of any warmth. Deadpan. It was more painful than any anger he could have shown. Sabihin mo na lahat ng gusto mong sabihin. And so, she did. Talking through a torrent of luha, her voice thick with unshed grief and overwhelming pagsisisi, Clarice confessed everything. 10 taon. 10 years of deceit, one for every year of their marriage. She didn't spare herself, didn't tear aside to make excuses, even though the childhood ghosts of hindi ka sapat clawed at her. She laid bare the ugliness of her choices, the betrayals, the lies that had become her second skin. Hindi ko alam kung bakit, Dante, she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. Siguro may sira talaga sa akin. Siguro hinahanap ko yung pagmamahal na akala ko hindi ko nakuha. Pero mali. Lahat mali. She talked about Rina. Si Rina, she was different. Akala ko sa kanya ko mahahanap yung pagtanggap. Pero pati siya, nasaktan ko lang din lahat sila, Dante. Lahat sila, ginamit ko lang para takpan yung butas dito sa dibdib ko. She pounded a fist against her chest, a gesture of pure self-loathing. Throughout her confession, Dante just listened. His expression never changed. Walang galit, walang awa. Parang nakikinig lang siya sa isang kwento na walang kinalaman sa kanya. It was terrifying. When she finally ran out of words, when all that was left were choked sobs and the taste of salt and regret on her lips, heavy silence descended. Only the distant sounds of the tallier punctuated the stillness. Clarice waited, her breath held captive in her lungs. Was this it? Would he just stand up and walk away again, leaving her shattered in his wake? Then, Dante spoke. His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. He didn't ask Gale, or how she could do it. He didn't rage or accuse. He just asked one question, the question that cut her deeper than any condemnation could. May mahal ka ba sa kanila, Clarice? The question hung in the air, stark and brutal. Mahal? Did she love any of them? She searched her heart, the desolate, ruined landscape of her emotions. The affairs, they were fleeting, desperate attempts to feel something, anything. But love? Hindi, she whispered, the word tasting like ash. Wala, Dante. Wala akong minahal sa kanila. Her eyes, pleading, sought his. Ikaw lang naman ang laging nandito. But even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. How could he believe her now? Pero nasaktan ka pa rin, she added, her voice breaking completely. Nasaktan kita. Sobra. Dante looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of the immense pain she had inflicted. It was quickly masked, but she saw it was enough to break what little was left of her resolve. He stood up. Tapos na. Clarice could only nod, fresh tears streaming down her face. Without another word, Dante turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the bench, the weight of her confession settling around her like shroud. He didn't look back. The echo of his question, "May mahal ka ba sa kanila?" and her devastating answer, lingered in the greasy air of the talyer, a testament to the wreckage she had made of their lives. Pagsisisi. It was a bitter, all-consuming fire. The days that followed Dante's departure from the talyer, and from her life, were the special kind of hell. Clarice was truly alone now. Si Ian, ipinagbilin muna ni Dante kay Ate Presi. Para hindi na rin makita ng bata yung gulo natin, Dante had said over a brief, sterile phone call arranged with her cousin. The words, though practical, felt like another shard of glass in Clarice's heart. Pati ang anak niya, inilalayo na sa kanya. Deserve niya. Alam niya. The small house felt cavernous, each empty room echoing her despair. She'd wander from the sala to the kusina, then to her bedroom, the scent of Dante still faintly clinging to the unwashed pillowcases. Minsan, nahuhuli niya ang sarili niyang kinakausap ang mga pader, nagtatanong kung saan siya nagkamali. Pero alam naman niya ang sagot. Sa lahat. Hoong mang. That was the word. It's deep, disorienting confusion mixed with terrifying certainty that she had ruined everything beyond repair. What was left for her? Anong silbi ng buhay niya kung wala na ang dalawang pinakamahalagang tao sa kanya? The guilt was a relentless beast, gnawing at her insides, whispering accusations in the dead of night. Wala kang kwenta. Salot ka. Mas mabuti pang mawala ka na lang. One particularly bleak afternoon, the air outside as gray and oppressive as the mood inside her, Clarice found herself walking aimlessly. Her feet, heavy as lead, carried her through the familiar streets of their barangay, past the chattering neighbors whose pitying glances she could feel like pinpricks on her skin. Hindi niya alam saan siya pupunta, basta palayo lang. Palayo sa bahay na puno ng multo ng nakaraan. Her steps eventually led her to the old, slightly rickety footbridge that spanned the murky estero at the edge of their barangay. It wasn't a high bridge, but a fall from it onto the debris-strewn water below. The thought, dark and insidious, slithered into her mind. Kung wala na rin lang akong babalikan. She stood there, staring sa edge ng tulay, her hands gripping the rusty railing so tightly her knuckles were white. The murky water below seemed to beckon, promising a cessation of pain, an end to the crushing weight of her regrets. Takot. The fear was still there, primal instinct to survive, but it was being rapidly overshadowed by profound, soul-deep weariness. Pagod na ako. She leaned forward, her body trembling. A sob escaped her lips, a sound of utter desolation. Patawarin niyo ako, Dante Ian. Biglang tunog ng kampana. The sudden, clear peal of the church bells from the nearby simbahan cut through the suffocating fog in her mind. Once, twice, thrice. It was the call for the Angelus. A sound she'd heard countless times throughout her life, a comforting, familiar ritual of their community. Clarice froze, her gaze lifting from the murky water to the distant silhouette of the church steeple against the darkening surf. The sound, so ordinary, so everyday, felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Kung ito ang dulo, she whispered, her voice hoarse, bakit may tunog pa ng simula? The bells continued to ring, steady and persistent. Simula. Beginning. Was it possible? Kahit sa gitna ng lahat ng to. Kahit sa kabila ng lahat ng kasalanan niya. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Clarice pulled back from the railing. Her legs felt weak, shaky, but she forced herself to turn away from the abyss. The bells, they weren't just a sound, they were a key possibility. A teeny, flickering ember of pag-asa in the vast darkness of her despair. She walked back home, her steps still heavy, but with newfound, albeit fragile, resolve. Hindi pa tapos. Hindi pa pwedeng matapos ng ganito. Pagdating sa bahay, she found a pen and some old, yellowed stationery tucked away in a drawer, a forgotten relic from her high school days. Her hands were still trembling, but she forced herself to write. Hindi niya alam kung paano sisimulan. Anong sasabihin mo sa anak mo pagkatapos mong sirain ang pamilya niyo? But the words, clumsy and tear-stained, began to flow. Mahal kong Ian. Hindi ko alam kung mababasa mo to, hindi ko rin alam kung maintindihan mo. Pero kailangan kong sabihin sa'yo, anak. She wrote about her love for him, a love that was fierce and true, even if her actions had hidden it so effectively. She wrote about her mistakes, not to excuse them, but to own them. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not yet. She just asked for him to know. To know that in the deepest, most broken part of her, he was, and always would be, her greatest love, her greatest regret. She folded the letter, her tears dotting the cheap paper. Bukas, ipapadala niya kay Ate Presi. Para kay Ian. It was a small step, a teeny gesture in the face of an insurmountable mountain of wrongs. But it was a step. Ian, staying at his Tita Presi's, was quiet when his aunt handed him the letter few days later. Galing sa mama mo, anak. He took the letter, his small hand surprisingly steady. He recognized his mother's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting on the envelope. He stared at it for a long time, his young face a mixture of emotions he couldn't yet name. Hurt, anger, confusion and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of something else. Hesitant, he slowly began to open the letter, the crinkle of paper sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Weeks turned into a month. Clarice existed in a strange limbo, cleaning the house with diligence born of penance, cooking meals she barely touched, and attending daily mass at the small simbahan whose bells had pulled her back from the brink. She didn't pray for miracles, just for strength. Strength to face each day, strength to accept whatever future awaited her. She didn't hear from Dante directly. Updates came through Aunt Presi. Ian was doing okay in school, though he was quieter. Dante was working. That was all. One late afternoon, as Clarice was sweeping the dried leaves from their small patch of a front yard, a familiar figure appeared at the rusty gate. Si Dante. Her heart leaped into her throat. Para siyang naniga sa kinatatayuan niya, hawak pa rin ang walis tingting. He looked tired, lines of strain etched around his eyes, but there was calmness about him she hadn't seen since before Rina. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his gaze taking in the swept yard, the slightly cleaner facade of their house. Then, his eyes met hers. No anger. No accusation. Just deep, unfathomable weariness, and something else she couldn't quite decipher. Pwede ba akong pumasok? He finally asked, his voice quiet. Clarice could only nod, her throat tight. She stepped aside, holding the gate open. Inside, the house felt different with him in it again. Less empty. Less haunted. He sat on the old sofa, the one where had first seen the photos. Clarice remained standing, unsure of what to do, what to say. Dante reached into the faded backpack he carried and pulled out something. A slim, wear notebook. Her notebook. Ang diary niya nung dalaga pa siya, a collection of her silly dreams, her teenage angst, her hopes for the future. She hadn't seen it in years. Akala niya nawala na. Naiwan mo to sa salumang bowl ni Mama, he said, placing it on the center table. Nung kinuha ko yung ibang gamit ko. He paused, then added, binasa ko. Clarice's breath hitched. Her innermost thoughts, her younger, more innocent self, laid bare for him to see. Nahiya siya, pero at the same time, a strange sense of vulnerability washed over her. That notebook held Clarice's untainted years of lies. Dante looked up at her, his gaze steady. Marami kang pangarap noon, Clarice. Para sa sarili mo, para sa atin. He gestured vaguely around the small living room. Hindi naging ganito, no? Tears pricked her eyes. Hindi, she whispered. Kasalanan ko. He was silent for a long moment, just looking at her, as if seeing her for the first time, or perhaps, for the last. The silence wasn't accusatory this time. It was thoughtful. Pensive. Then, he spoke the words that would change everything. Pwede pa ba nating subukan, Clarice? Her head snapped up. Ano? Subukan ulit, he clarified, his voice low, almost hesitant. Hindi ko sinasabing madali. Hindi ko sinasabing makakalimutan ko lahat. Pero kahit para kay Ian lang. Para sa kanya, pwede pa ba nating subukan na nabuin ulit kung anuman ang natitira? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain, with the monumental weight of their shared history, and with a fragile, flickering hope. Pagpapatawad. It wasn't explicitly offered, not yet. But the willingness to PSI it was a start. A monumental start. Clarice's knees felt weak. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, opposite him. Dante, sigurado ka ba? She asked, her voice trembling. Kaya mo ba? Kaya ko ba? Hindi ko alam, he admitted, a flicker of his old honesty in his eyes. Pero siguro yun ang kailangan nating alamin. Magkasama. He looked towards the window, towards the direction of Eight Press's house. Nakita ko si Ian kanina. Tinanong niya kung kailan daw ako uuwi. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Sabi ko, hindi ko pa alam. The next Sunday, a quiet miracle happened. Clarice was already at the simbahan, seated in her usual spot at the back, when two figures slipped into the pew beside her. Si Dante. At sa tabi niya, si Ian. Ian looked at her, a tentative smile on his face. He reached out a small hand and hesitantly, awkwardly, took hers. Clarice's heart swelled. She squeezed his hand gently, tears blurring her vision. Dante didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the altar. But she felt his presence beside her, a solid, reassuring weight. They sat there, the three of them, not as a perfectly whole family, not yet. Maraming sugat. Maraming kailangang ayusin. But they were together. Side by side. Under the roof of the church that had, in its own way, brought them back to a semblance of a beginning. The priest began the mass. The familiar prayers, the vibrance, the scent of incense, it all washed over Clarice, not with the sting of guilt this time, but with a quiet sense of grace. As the service ended and people began to file out, Clarice turned to Dante, her voice barely above a whisper, full of emotion she couldn't quite name. Salamat, Dante. He finally looked at her, his eyes holding a complex mixture of pain, uncertainty, and a sliver of something she dared to hope was warmth. Wala ayun. He paused, then added, his voice gruff but sincere, salamat din kahit walang kasiguraduhan. Walang kasiguraduhan. No guarantees. But for the first time in a very long time, Clarice felt a flicker of genuine hope. Hindi madali pero posible. The road to healing would be long and arduous, paved with difficult conversations and the slow rebuilding of trust. But as they walked out of the church together, Ian skipping slightly ahead, the morning sun warm on their faces, Clarice knew, deep in her battered but slowly mending heart, that this was where she was supposed to be. Ito ang pamilya niya. At lalaban siya para dito. Mahal kong mga mambabasa. Mula sa kaibuturan ng puso ko, maraming salamat sa inyong walang sawang pagsubaybay at pagsama sa akin sa bawat kabanata ng kwento ni na Clarice, Dante at Ian. Ang inyong suporta ang nagsilbing inspirasyon ko upang tapusin ang kanilang paglalakbay. Hindi naging madali ang pagsulat nito. May mga pagkakataong nadadala rin ako sa bigat ng emosyon, sa sakit ng pagtataksil, sa pait ng pagsisisi, at sa komplikadong daan patungo sa paghilom at pagpapatawad. Nais kong maging tapat sa paglalarawan ng mga damdaming ito, dahil alam kong sa tunay na buhay, hindi laging madali ang magmahal at magpatawad. Kung mayroon man akong nais iparating sa pamamagitan ng kwentong ito ay ang katotohanang lahat tayo ay nagkakamali. Tao lang tayo, marupok at minsan ay nadadala ng tukso o ng sarili nating mga kahinaan. Pero hindi doon nagtatapos ang lahat. Laging may puwang para sa pagbangon, sa paghingi ng tawad, sa iba at sa sarili, at sa pagsisikap na itama ang mga mali. Ang pagpapatawad, para sa iba o para sa sarili, ay isang mahabang proseso, minsan masakit, pero laging posible. At higit sa lahat, laging may pag-asa. Ang pamilya, sa anumang anyo nito, ay isang biyaya na karapat-dapat ipaglaban. Sana po ay may napulot kayong aral o inspirasyon sa kwentong ito, gaano man kaliit. Kung nagustuhan ninyo ang paglalakbay ni na Clarice at Dante, huwag po kayong mag-atubiling ibahagi ito sa inyong mga kaibigan o kakilala na maaaring makaka-relate o makakakuha rin ng aral. Nais ko ring marinig ang inyong mga saloobin. Ano ang tumatak sa inyo? May mga eksena ba na nakaantig sa inyong puso? Mag-iwan lang po kayo ng komento sa ibaba. Bawat isa sa inyong mensahe ay mahalaga sa akin at nagsisilbing gabay para sa mga susunod ko pang akda. Muli, isang taos pusong pasasalamat. Hanggang sa muli nating pagkikita sa mga susunod pang kwento. Nagmamahal. Ang inyong manunulat.